Thank you very much. As some of you know, that Pastor Shane and his family are out of town. They're on vacation. So here I am. Here I am. So one of the things that's most scary about standing up here is what the things I worry about is whether I mispronounce a name wrong, because you know the Bible has some crazy names. Let's just say that. And and some words. So if I mispronounce something wrong, it's okay. Just roll with it with me. Just roll with it. It's okay. The title of my message is Don't Bury It Just Yet. Tell your neighbor, don't bury it just yet.
Don't bury it just yet.
That's right. I'm going to start in 2 Kings chapter 4, starting in verses 8. Chapter 4, starting in verses 8, and we're going to go all the way through chapter 37. I know that sounds like a lot of verses, but I promise you this will be 4 through 37. It's chapter 4, 2 Kings. 2 Kings chapter 4, starting in verse 8. We're going to go all the way through 37. I know that sounds like a lot of verses, but I promise you this will be the fastest sermon you ever heard in your entire life. So we're going to talk about a man in the Bible, and his name is Elisha. Not Elijah, Elisha. So if I get those mixed up, you know who I'm talking about. Elisha. And a woman from a town of Shunem. The Bible doesn't mention her name. It refers to her as the Shunammite. Just to get that straight. Okay, I'm going to start in verse 8. Now it happened one day that Elisha went to Shunem, where there was a notable woman, and she persuaded him to eat some food. So it was as often as he passed by, he would turn in there and eat some food. Now I want to go back. It says she's a notable woman. That means that she's a great woman. She's a woman of standards, and she has the gift of hospitality. How many of you grew up with a grandmother or someone, every time you went to their house, they always tried to feed you, even if you weren't hungry? I had a grandmother-in-law that every time you went to her house, whether you were hungry or not, she was going to feed you. She was going to give you some cake, and even if you didn't eat, she was going to give you some sweet tea. So she was a notable woman. She persuaded him. It doesn't say she invited him. She had to persuade him to come and eat. Picking up in verse 9, it says, and she said to her husband, look now, I know that this is a holy man of God who passes by us regularly. Verse 10, please let us make a small upper room on the wall, and let us put a bed for him there, and a table, and a chair, and a lampstand. So it will be, whenever he comes to us, he can turn in there. She wanted to be hospitable. She wanted this man of God, when he came to their town, she wanted to feed him. She wanted to be a servant unto him. She wanted to feed him. She wanted him to have a place to lay down when he was come through traveling. Verse 11, and it happened one day that he came there, and he turned into the upper room and laid down there. Then he said to Gehazi, his servant, call a Shunammite woman. When he called her, she stood before him. And he said to him, say now to her, look, you have been considered for us with all this care. What can I do for you? Do you want me to speak on your behalf to the king or to the commander of the army? And she answered, I dwell among my own people. See, he was an important person. He was a prophet of God. And he knew people. He knew the king. He knew the commander of the army. And because she was so hospitable to them, to give them food and to have a place to stay and lay their head down, he wanted to do something for her in return. But she told him, I dwell among my own people. In other words, she didn't need anything. She was good. At least she thought she was anyway. Verse 14. So he said, what then is it What then is to be done for her? And Gehazi answered, actually, she has no son, and her husband is old. For some reason, he doesn't directly speak to her. He uses his servant, and I'm not too sure why, but that's what he does. He speaks like through his servant to her. Verse 15, so he called her. When he had called her, she stood in the doorway. Then he said, about this time next year, you shall embrace a son. And she said, no, my Lord, no, man of God, do not lie to your maidservant. She said, no. You know, I could see her standing there saying, no, my Lord, man of God, do not lie to your maidservant. But the woman conceived and bore a son when the anointed time had come, and Elisha had told her. Verse 18, and the child grew up. Now it happened one day that he went out to his father to the reapers, which is the people out in the field to harvest the crops. Verse 19, and he said to his father, my head, my head. And it's got an exclamation point, so he had to have been, I can imagine him saying, my head, my head. So he said to the servant, carry him to his mother. Verse 20, when he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her knees till noon, and then he died. So he was of age, out of diapers, of age to go out to the field with his dad. The Bible doesn't say how old he was, but I'm assuming he was pretty still young because he was sitting on the knees of his mother. In 21, let's go back to verse 20. When he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her knees till noon, and then he died. And she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, shut the door upon him, and went out. She did some important things here. She didn't freak out because he died. I can imagine myself running around like crazy thinking, oh my gosh, what happened? But she didn't lay him on her husband's bed. She didn't lay her son on her own son's bed. She laid her son on the man of God's bed that she had prepared a room for. Verse 22, then she called her husband and said, please send me one of the young men and one of the donkeys, that I may run to the man of God and come back. So he said, why are you going to him today? It is neither the new moon nor the Sabbath. And she said, it is well. It is well. That's what she said. She didn't say, our son is dead. She said, it is well. Then she saddled a donkey and said to her servant, drive and go forward. Do not slack the pace for me unless I tell you. So she was telling him to book it. And so she departed and went to the man of God of Mount Carmel. So it was when the man of God saw her afar away or far off that he said to his servant Gehazi, look, the Shunammite woman. Please run to meet her and say to her, is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with your child, with the child? And she answered, it is well. Again, for the second time, she said, it is well. Verse 27, now when she came to the man of God at the hill, she caught him by the feet. But Gehazi came near to push her away. But the man of God said, let her alone, for her soul is in deep distress, and the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me. Verse 28, so she said, did I ask a son of my Lord? Did I not say, do not deceive me? She did not say, my son is dead. She is telling him, can you just see her at his feet, saying, did I ask a son of my Lord? Did I not say, do not deceive me? Then he said to Gehazi, get yourself ready and take my staff, your hand, and be on your way. If you meet anyone, do not greet them, And if anyone greets you, do not answer him, but lay my staff on the face of the child. And the mother of the child said, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, I will not leave. That's just like a mother. When your child is in distress or whatever's going on, they're going to hold on to Jesus. And they're not going to turn loose until an answer comes. So she told him she was not leaving. She was staying. So he rose up and he followed her. Verse 31. Now Gehazi went on ahead of them, and he laid the staff on the face of the child. But there was neither voice nor hearing. Therefore he went back to meet him and told him, saying, the child has not awakened. In other words, he was still dead. Verse 32. When Elisha came into the house, there was the child laying dead on the bed. He went in, therefore, shut the door behind the two of them, and prayed to the Lord. And he went up and laid on the child, and put his mouth on his mouth, his eyes on his eyes, and his hands on his hands. And he stretched himself out on the child, and the flesh of the child became warm because of his warmth. The body laying on the child warmed his flesh. Verse 35, he returned and walked back and forth in the house. Now can you see him? He's walking, he's off the child, he's walking back and forth, and I can imagine him saying, dear Lord, I prophesied that she would have a child. She have a child, and now the child is dead. And now she won't listen to me because she thinks and she believes that you can bring this child back to life. You know, let your healing power work through me to bring this child to life. He returned and walked back and forth in the house, and again went up and stretched himself out on him. Then the child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. And he called Gehazi and said, call the Shunammite woman. So he called her, and when he came in to him, he said, pick up your child. So she went in, fell at his feet, and bowed to the ground when she picked up her son and went out. So the child came back to life. That's a miracle. Some points I feel like the Lord wants to make here this morning. I know this is the message that he spoke today, because I called Linda, knew Linda wanted to sing a special, and I called her and asked her what song she was going to sing, her and her daughter, Rochelle, and she said it as well. And I just about fell out of my chair because I said, dear Lord, because I already had 2 weeks ago what the Lord wanted me to speak about today. And so that was just confirmation that Linda had no clue. So I know that was the song they were to sing today. And this is the message that the God wants to go forth through our ears to ear today. Some points I feel like the Lord wants to make here this morning is, number 1, the Shunammite woman was a noble woman who loved to show hospitality to Elisha. And I think the Lord must have taken note of that, and he wanted to reward her with a long-forgotten desire in her heart. But I think that she had gotten to a place in her life that she had given up on having a child and just buried that idea in her mind and moved on with life. It doesn't say in the Bible how old she was or how old her husband was, but it says her husband was old. So I'm just thinking that I think that she was probably younger than him, that she was able to conceive a child, but her husband was older. So I think she just gave up on that idea, that desire that she had in her heart to have a child. It says, Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9, which is talking about this I have not seen, nor ear heard, nor have entered into the heart of man the things which God has prepared for those who love him. Realizing what this verse says actually takes a step of faith. The problem with comfort zones is they replace our faith in God with a fake sense of assurance found only inside of our comfort zones. At such time, God walks us to a place where he puts us with challenges that challenges our faith. It says in Romans 12:3, in the end of that verse, it says that as God has dwelt to each one a measure of faith, when we are born, God has given us each a measure of faith. We all have faith. It's where we put our faith at and who we put our faith in. We all have faith that these chairs that we're sitting in are going to hold us up. We all have faith that the car that we get in is going to start when we start it. But so we all have faith. We all have faith in something. It's just where do we put where do we place our faith in? Who and what do we put our faith in? Number 2, the Bible tells us that the child was born and he grew to be an age to go out to the field with his father. Then disaster strikes. But the interesting thing is that what the mother did, the way she responded to the tragedy, instead of arranging for the funeral of the boy, which Jews generally bury their dead within 24 hours, she placed him on Elisha's bed and took off. That was an act of faith. She believed God could raise her son from the dead. God had given this woman her own measure of faith, and now it needed to grow. Maybe she had a sense of insecurity which had hindered her faith not to grow, because she said to Elijah, "Did I ask my master for a son? Did I say, 'Don't mislead me'?" All of our faith needs to grow, because discovering all good things that God has for us is not always easy. Sometimes we get comfort and content in our own securities, feeling happy about what the Lord has already done for us, and we forget about the far greater things to come. We get comfortable. We pray for certain things, it happens, and then we get comfortable, and we don't move on to the next step because we're in that security of what God has already given us. But in reality, there are far greater things that God has for us. That's just like me and Mike getting married. We, prayed about it. We got married. We lived apart in 2 different states for a year and a half. And then through all that, God finally had us to where we were living together, married. And then you get stuck kind of in a comfort zone, like, okay, there's something else that's next. God didn't bring us together out of all of that, of all the things that, the tragedies and stuff that we've lived through, to just have us married and living in the same house. The story doesn't stop there, but we get safe feeling, okay, God answered that prayer, but there are greater things to come in all of our lives. So don't get stuck in that comfort zone. Look for what's next. All of our faith has to grow, because discovering all the good things that God has for us is not always easy. Point 3. She said 3 very important words more than one time in this story. And those 3 words were, "It is well." Can we all say that? It is well. Those were 3 important words that she said. I'm going to ask Tiffany to please play a video. If you could turn the lights off, Mr. Mike, please.
Horatio Spafford was a well-known lawyer and businessman in Chicago in the 1860s, where he lived with his wife Anna and their 5 children. He had invested heavily in real estate along the shores of Lake Michigan. He was a prosperous man and a devout Christian. However, in 1870, a series of events began to turn Horatio's world upside down. That year, Horatio and Anna's only son died of scarlet fever at the tender age of only 4. A year later, while the Spaffords were still grieving the loss of their son, the Great Chicago Fire broke out and destroyed nearly every one of Horatio's investments. His entire life savings was gone. Aware of the toll these disasters had taken on his family, Horatio decided to take his wife and 4 daughters on a holiday to England, where they planned to accompany the famous evangelist D.L. Moody on his next crusade. However, just before they set sail, a last-minute business development forced Horatio to delay. Not wanting to ruin the family holiday, he persuaded his family to go on as planned, and he would follow along later. With this decided, Horatio stayed in Chicago while Anna and the girls boarded the French steamship Ville du Havre to set sail for England. But several days later, Horatio received devastating news. The Ville du Havre had been struck by an iron sailing vessel from England. The ship sank in only 12 minutes, claiming the lives of 226 passengers. It was the worst disaster in naval history until the sinking of the HMS Titanic 40 years later. The next day, he received a telegraph from Anna from Wales. It read these 6 words: "Survived alone. What should I do?" The Spaffords' 4 daughters were among those who perished. After hearing the terrible news, Horatio boarded the next ship out of New York to join his bereaved wife. During his voyage, the captain of the ship called him to the bridge. "A careful reckoning has been made," he said, "and I believe we are now passing the very place where the Ville du Havre sank." And it was there, while staring into the watery grave of his beloved daughters, that Horatio penned the words to the great hymn, "It is well with my soul."
Oh, and I believe you are the
The
way.
other song, It Is Well.
waked before, moved by the sound of his voice, and seas that are shaken and stirred can be calmed and broken for my regard. And through it all, my eyes are on you. And through it all, it is well. And through it all, my eyes are on you. And it is well with me. Far be it from me to not believe, even when my eyes can't see. And this mountain that's in front of me will be thrown into the midst of the sea. And through it all, my eyes are on you. And through it all, it is well. And through it all, my eyes are on you. And it is well. It is well. So let go, my soul, and trust in him. The waves and wind still know his name. So let go, my soul, and trust in him. The waves and wind still know his name. So let go, my soul, and trust